Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into our source material to tackle what's honestly one of the most dangerous hazards an economy can face, the deflationary trap.
It's a pretty stark question, right? What happens when an economy just stops spending? We usually worry so much about inflation, about prices running too hot. But the opposite scenario, when demand just suddenly vanishes and the engines of commerce literally grind to a halt, well, that's a high-stakes crisis that can trap an entire economy in a downward spiral for years.
Section 1. Defining deficient demand.
So, looking at the textbook definition directly from our source material, it says deficient demand is the amount by which aggregate expenditure falls short of aggregate output at full employment. But okay, look closely at what that's actually saying. It means total spending, what we call aggregate expenditure, is falling short of total output exactly when the economy is at full employment. This is a massive, incredibly dangerous shortfall. Just think about it for a second. Right when an economy should be operating at its absolute peak capacity, with everyone working and factories humming along, the spending just isn't there to buy up all those produced goods and services.
Moving on to Section 2, the macroeconomic blueprint.
All right, let's look at this diagram from our source material, which maps out deficient demand. Now I know, there are a lot of intersecting lines and axes here. We've got income and output on the horizontal axis and desired aggregate expenditure on the vertical. But seriously, don't let it overwhelm you. It's kind of like a giant puzzle, and we're going to dissect these mechanics step by step to see exactly where the failure happens.
First step, let me guide your eyes right to point E on the chart. This right here is the absolute holy grail for policymakers, full employment equilibrium. It's where the aggregate expenditure curve, which is labeled AE0, perfectly intersects that 45-degree line. At this specific point, which aligns with the output level YF down on the horizontal axis, the economy is in perfect harmony. Basically, everyone who wants a job has one, and society is buying exactly what it's capable of producing.
But now, what's really interesting about this slide is what happens when confidence cracks. Look at that lower line, AE1. Imagine government spending gets severely slashed, or private investment just abruptly dries up. The aggregate expenditure curve suddenly drops from AE0 straight down to AE1. So the economy is still technically capable of producing at that full employment level of YF, but the desired spending across the nation, it's violently contracted.
And that brings us to the most critical part of this entire blueprint. See that vertical distance labeled EA running along the dotted line for full employment? Well, at output YF, the new depressed aggregate demand is all the way down at point A, but our aggregate supply, it remains way up at point E. That specific gap between E and A, literally the vertical shortfall between what we can produce and what we're actually willing to spend, that is exactly what economists call the deflationary gap.
Which brings us to Section 3, sizing the deflationary gap. Let's quickly contrast these two states. On one side, you've got the ideal state, full employment equilibrium, where aggregate supply and aggregate demand are perfectly matched up. Beautiful, right? But on the flip side is the grim reality of the deflationary gap. Because spending is so highly deficient, the economy just can't sustain that full capacity. It's literally forced to slide backward, eventually coming to rest at a new, much lower intersection that was point E1 on our previous graph. This is an underemployment equilibrium. The market is effectively trapped in this depressed, sluggish state.
Let's look at the actual consequences in Section 4, real-world economic fallout. This triggers a totally violent downward chain reaction. First, demand is just insufficient to purchase the potential output. It's like warehouses rapidly fill up with unsold goods. Second, to stop the financial bleeding, firms have to slash production, meaning output, income, and employment all violently shrink downward. And third, because there is this massive excess supply of goods competing for very few buyers, businesses are forced into heavy discounting. They slash prices just to survive. And that, my friends, is deflation.
And this brilliantly illustrates the core equation of the whole trap. Deficient demand absolutely equals excess supply, which strictly equals falling prices. It's a complete vicious cycle. As prices begin to fall, consumers delay their spending because, well, they think things will be even cheaper tomorrow, right? That delayed spending only causes demand to drop even further, leading to more layoffs and even deeper price cuts.
Which leaves us with a massive policy puzzle. Once that deflationary gap opens up and you're stuck in an underemployment equilibrium where demand has vanished and prices are continuously falling, how in the world does a nation actually spend its way out of the trap? Do you rely on the government to step in with massive fiscal spending, or maybe the central bank to drastically slash interest rates? I'll leave you to ponder that massive challenge. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and as always, keep questioning the data.